Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm chatting with Christian Easterday from Hot Chile. In today's interview, we discuss the price of copper and where Christian thinks it could be heading, and the company's Costa Fuego project, of which the company expects to have a bankable pre-feasibility study done in Q1 of 2025. And Christian's going to give us sort of what that roadmap looks like for the company to eventually get to production. All right, everybody, enjoy the interview. Christian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, good to be back, Steve.
So, where do we start? Copper is this commodity that I talk to a lot of people who, some of which are quite wealthy and made a lot of money in commodities over the years, and they all think that there's this huge bull market coming to copper, but it feels like every time it's happening, there's a rug pull on all of us where it'll test $5 and then comes right back down. And even since you and I last spoke in Boca Raton, Florida, we saw that happen with copper. What's your read right now on what's happening in the copper market?
Yes, Steve, I agree. It's a little frustrating when you have multiple false starts. And I think what's frustrating is that there's a pretty broad understanding of copper's central role in electrification of everything and where the world is heading to. So I think that broadly there are so many eyes on copper, second largest metal market in the world, probably poised to be the number one metal market in the world. All of the right signals from the majors, starting a consolidation phase amongst existing production, and now starting to see the tipping point towards the buy versus build and moving into investments in the developers. We saw the BHP move on a joint venture with Lundin on Jose Maria and Philo over in our neck of the woods, just above us in the Wasco. And now yesterday, even a tier 2 deposit, which was discovered by Rio Tinto back when we were making a lot of noise with that Cordillera discovery. A similar size deposit, a little bit lower grade than us, 80 meters of sand over the top of it, 340 kilometers from coast, and still yet to deliver a pre-feasibility, but attracting Sumitomo as a 30% investor for 400 million US investment for a joint venture on that project. So a lot of good things going on in the space. But yes, these sort of volatile movements with price squeezes earlier in the year driving to $5.20. I think these are little windows into what the future may look like. But we're all very, very keen to get to that future as fast as possible. But having run Hot Chili since I founded the company 16 years ago, and we started our journey 14 years ago with Costa Fuego, the large scale copper business is something that you've got to have a lot of patience for. You've got to be prepared to move through the cycles. These projects take 17, 18 years to develop. So for us, look, the end of the decade is looking very strong for copper, and it looks very strong for our timetable. But yes, I agree with you, Steve. Been a big difference between the 6 months from when I last saw you when copper was rounding out around the $5 per pound mark.
So I recently chatted with Brian Dalton from Altius, and something that he said that they talk a lot about in their organization when they're evaluating uh, royalty deals and talking about projects is this idea of the incentive price for copper. So what's that price where we're going to actually see a lot of capital start to pour into copper names and copper juniors and the drill bit, and uh, basically people want to start investing in copper names. Where do you see that incentive price for copper? Do you think it's five? Do you think it's six? Do you think it's $8? Where do you think it sits?
Yeah, look, it's a moving it's a moving issue in terms of a year and a half ago we were running a PEA on our project at $3.85 long term consensus price from 27 banks, right? That price today, I just got CIBC's update through on their basket, 26 bank. That's sitting at $4.25 per pound. And then we saw 2 weeks ago, while I was hosting a tour of our project with with 10 analysts from North America and Australia. We started to see the news filtering in from the BHP analyst tour over on Escondida and Spence and their operations in Chile, and the BHP guys using a $4.50 per pound price deck for their investments over in Chile, and $14 billion US of investment just to maintain existing production. So, what is incentive price? I hear a lot of people talking about $4.50. I hear more people talking about $5, and that's because we're in an inflationary environment. We have a lot of upward cost pressure on the industry, not just the copper sector, but the mining industry in general. So, I would say that today, probably if I wanted to draw a line across every meaningful copper development, and we do a lot of benchmarking to understand the space in Hot Chili, but I wanted to draw a line across projects that would lift everyone to a 30% IRR and a cash flow index of 1, which is, if you put $1 billion in, you want your $1 billion back, and you want to make $1 billion. That's pretty much a starting point for investment in our sector. If I wanted to lift all of our peer group, every project above 40,000 ton potential production base, we actually modeled that about 6 months ago at around $5.10 per pound US. So, that's where our view is at the moment, but no doubt in another year, you'll probably be pushing towards $5.30, $5.40 on the same metric. So that's my view on incentive price.
Okay, so let's just back up a little bit here for our audience that is new to the story. My understanding is that we got two parts to the Hot Chili story. First, we got your flagship Costa Fuego project, and second, you guys have a water supply business that you embarked on back in July. Let's begin with Costa Fuego. For our audience, just to sort of set the stage for them, how would you describe the project from a high level?
Yeah, look, this is a project that we have consolidated and built from nothing on the coastline, starting from our listing in 2010 at the end of the last copper cycle, and building now what is a production hub comprising two very large deposits that straddle the Pan American Highway. Key differentiator with the resource base that we built and the $230 million invested to date is that we sit at low altitude. We're the largest scale project at the lowest elevation, and that's really meaningful from a cost base and from a risk base. At the moment, we are about to deliver our pre-feasibility early in 2025 on this project, and that is scaling that project at this stage at around 100,000 tons per annum of fine copper production, as well as 50,000 ounces of gold annually. 16-year mine life, which is probably growing towards 20 in the pre-feasibility to come out shortly. And then Hot Chili is in its final stage to complete a bankable study and deliver a financing decision on this in and around late 26, possibly early 27, and have this in production by the end of the decade. And to put that in context, there are very few projects in the copper space of this scale. 5, in fact, that are controlled outside of the majors. So we're one of the very few independent, large-scale or meaningful copper projects, we like to say, and one of the even fewer that is capable of production by the end of the decade. So, copper price and where things are going there is very, very important to Chile with timing. Bringing large-scale copper projects on is all about timing. And then it's all about capital intensity. This is a term that you're going to hear more and more about. So how much do you have to put in to deliver annual copper supply? At the moment, the industry is trending in the $20,000 to $25,000 per annualized ton of copper it costs you. And Hot Chili really, really differentiate in the space. We sit at the bottom end of that scale at around $10,000 per ton. And that's because of that low elevation. And then the second aspect to this story that we've been developing is in this journey, this long journey to develop this project. These projects take on average, I think S&P just published last week, 17.3 years it takes to build a large copper project from commencement to production. We have taken around about 12 years so far to secure our own water assets. And that's really, really important because we're in the Atacama, where the lion's share of copper production in the world comes from. And the Atacama rivers don't flow anymore. We're in one of the most water-stressed areas of the world, and the regulatory environment over the past decade means that now you can't take water out of the ground. So all water for new developments and existing developments are transitioning towards extracting water from the ocean. So maritime concessions to take water out of the ocean are as valuable as the copper projects themselves. We're in a region that is about to supply almost 20% of new supply over the coming 15 to 20 years. 6 of the world's major undeveloped projects all sitting around us, and Hot Chili has the only water license to supply ourselves uniquely with salt water for processing. We also sit in that basket of 25% of production coming out of Chile is developed from projects that can process with salt water, not because we're trying to find a cheaper way to do it, but because our metallurgy dictates that we get better copper recoveries using salt water. So we're one of those projects. It means we skip a lot of capital because we're not at 4,000 meters, 4,500 meters in nosebleed country with massive capital hurdles to build our project. But we have water security, and we're missing large capital items such as $500 million and $1 billion desalination water plants. So leveraging off of that, 6 months ago when we sat down in Boca Raton and we launched Wasco Water under the realization that we didn't just hold a copper project, we held the keys for a potential regional water business for the entire Wasco Valley. And so that's something we've been developing. We've been getting a huge amount of interest from some of the world's largest water players in the water sector and the infrastructure sector. And that's something we're advancing. And we're looking now to not only allow this to supply Hot Chili with water, but potentially to also develop a desalination business for the benefit of all of the communities, and develop a multi-user water business that can save billions of dollars of capital for our neighbors. And that's something that now probably holds a value in excess of Hot Chili's value. So over the coming 6 months, what's really exciting about this is, we're looking to utilize this to potentially sell down our 80% interest in Wasco Water, where we put all of our water rights, and look to utilize that to also reduce our capital on building Costa Fuego even further. And to give you an idea of what's going on in water in Chile, a recent transaction by Antofagasta Minerals on their large Centinela copper project in the north, a major scale copper project, which is undergoing a big expansion. They sold their water rights to a consortium of infrastructure players for $600 million US, giving that consortium the right to build the replacement water pipeline for Centinela for about $380 million. So it was about $1 billion accretive transaction, and Hot Chili is uniquely positioned to utilize this asset to almost fund our copper project by selling it and reducing our capital that we require to build Costa Fuego even further. So it's certainly gaining a lot of attention. The market is starting to understand what we're actually on about. But I imagine, with the onset of strategic partners that Hot Chili is looking to bring into that project, that value will be stacked on top of Hot Chili and Costa Fuego's value quite rapidly. So certainly watch this space.
Okay, so my understanding is you guys did a PEA for the project last year, and
Correct.
you guys are expecting to do a pre-feasibility study in Q1. Are you guys expecting the economics to improve here?
Yeah, look, we're still scaling this at 100,000 tons per annum of fine copper production. We think the PEA gave good shape. A lot of the revenue side of that study was tied down already. So we've gone through a significant optimization phase to complete the remaining elements of the pre-feasibility. And we've also paralleled a pre-feasibility study on Wasco Water to be delivered at the same time. So it's going to be a big first quarter for us in the new year, with both pre-feasibilities coming out and certainly getting a lot of strategic attention on that front. So that's great. But look, the shape is roughly going to be intact. But then at the same time, look, we're driving growth. We believe that we are sitting on not a billion ton resource, that it's at the end of its growth phase. We're pushing out now on a major new porphyry deposit, which we've secured just to the south of our production hub, 30 kilometers, called La Verde. Rigs are turning at the moment, and that is all about building our pathway towards 2 billion tons. But rather than let our continued growth hold up our development timeline to bring this into production, we're very much doing this in a staged approach, similar to what the guys at Teck are doing with Quebrada Blanca. They've delivered Quebrada Blanca into production, QB1 they call it, and in parallel they've been building on top a new layer of growth to upscale that project called QB2. So we're thinking about it in a very similar fashion. We're delivering on Costa Fuego 1, CF1, and we're investing heavily in our next stage of growth to lift this production base, hopefully towards 150,000 tonne per annum scale, which would make Costa Fuego the largest new production base outside of the majors coming to market. And so that's something that that continued consolidation efforts and exploration investment is aiming towards. But certainly the environmental impact assessments will be dealt with separately, and expansion pre-feasibilities, et cetera, will be layered on top later. We're not looking at all of those growth activities to delay our time frame on delivering a 100,000 tonne production starter project.
So my understanding is that your project's also going to require substantial upgrades to a nearby port. How challenging is this going to be to get done?
Yeah, well, look, it's always a benefit when you've got the port built for you. So we're not building a new port, and we've got port options to the north of us and to the south of us, with concentrate transport distances that are very similar if we were sitting up in the high Andes and having to truck our concentrate all the way down to port. We're just in the very, very fortunate position that this project is on the Pan American Highway at 700 meters, 50 kilometers from a port that was built and never really used, and it was built for third-party access. So it was always in the contemplation of that port when it was constructed to be upgraded towards a bulk copper concentrate terminal because of the number of discoveries and resources that have been developed in the area. So now we're actively participating in pushing that study forward with Port of Los Lozos. We're contributing 20% to a $4.5 million bankable study that's being run in parallel with our two pre-feasibilities on Costa Fuego and Wasco Water. So that's something that we're contributing to. We're not driving. We're letting the port company drive that. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we had our own port, first right of refusal for all of our concentrate sitting right next to us, that we can truck just straight into a loading facility there on a project that we're aiming to deliver on in 20 years mine life, and hopefully extend that towards 30 years with this upgrade.
So at what point do you guys start to have funding discussions to be able to get to the finish line of development, to get the project financing you need? I assume that this is ongoing, or is there a point that you guys have to get to before those conversations really pick up?
Yeah, those conversations never really end. These are relationship builds that take up a huge amount of my time, and have me over in North America a lot more these days, to a lesser extent Europe, but also into the Asian market, particularly in Japan, where there's a huge amount of interest for high quality, low impurity concentrate. It is really tough to get your hands on concentrate if you're a refiner in this market, and the refining sector just built in 9 million tons of additional smelting capacity, but the mining sector is struggling to build new supply. So, projects like Costa Fuego that are coming online at the end of the decade with a high quality concentrate are very, very sought after, and so discussions with strategics have been ongoing since we delivered the PEA, which is quite surprising. Most of those strategics are generally wanting to talk to you at pre-feasibility level, but as we just saw with Rio Tinto bringing in Sumitomo as a 30% partner into an early stage project, we knew without a pre-feasibility, a lot of things that used to not be possible are certainly possible. So the interest is there because the scarcity of the metal is very evident. So, we're going to continue those discussions all through our bankable study right up to project financing. We're in a fortunate position that we're very well funded at the moment. We took advantage of market conditions, and we're supported heavily by strategics on a $32 million capital raising back in April, May. And that means that we're well funded into the back end of next year. But certainly, I imagine that we'll be, reviewing that funding capability in the new year. But certainly, the delivery of all of our catalysts and the commencement of the bankable into the back end of 2025 is covered. But certainly the delivery of the bankable and that early reach from funding partners, is very much something that we're entertaining a lot of discussions on.
How substantial of revenue do you think you could get out of the water access? Is this kind of more of an ESG initiative, or could this be a substantial set of revenue for the company in the
Look,
big picture?
if we were looking to finance and build it ourselves and invest and become a water company, or have a water subsidiary, then you do the numbers on the saltwater side. On the saltwater side, it's very substantial, and that's something that's very tangible at the moment. We are the offtake partner. We require that water. That's a guaranteed offtake agreement that Hot Chili is negotiating with its own subsidiary at the moment. But then secondary, the desalination. If we look at what a 4,000 liter per second regional water supply business on a multi-user basis, would look like, then, we have Costa Fuego sitting there using $3.85 per pound copper, driving revenues of around, $850 million US annually. That equivalent water business just on the desalination side for the regional scale of 4,000 liters per second, that's around about 1.4 billion US of annual revenue. It gives you an idea as to the revenue capacity of the two projects. So it is very large. And certainly the saltwater business before it, which is the tangible component we control, that is about 30% revenue basis on that earlier figure. However, what we are looking to do is very simply let someone else build it, and let someone else finance it, and let that person let that group secure the offtake agreement with Hot Chili as the main customer to start the business, and look at that group secure the offtake agreements that Hot Chili will be developing with those neighbors on a potential desalination stage 2 business. So, it's certainly got a huge amount of potential. It's an interesting thing when a mining company is talking about an industrial project. Our investor base and our investor audience are mining investors. They certainly don't have the knowledge bank of the water sector. So we're almost embarking upon a mission to educate mining investors about a global sector which is nearly as large as the mining sector itself. And therefore, it's something that is taking a little bit for people to get their heads around. But put simply, we're looking to sell down a water business to fund a copper business, to fund the construction of that copper project.
Okay, Christian, last question for you. If I'm an investor in the company, or I have you guys on my watch list, what am I looking out for over we'll say, the next year?
Sure. Look, I think you're looking at one of the most undervalued, large scale advanced copper developers in the world. We sit at a valuation differential to our North American peers, which is where nearly all of the large scale developers reside, and why we are dual listed onto the TSXV. But we're valued under at about a 3 to 4 multiple right now, and that's largely because our price is driven from the Australian market, not well known for supporting large scale copper developers. So, at the outset, you're dealing with something that is a huge amount of underlying value just on the copper alone. And then we've layered on a 2-for-1 in that you're getting a water business that is not recognized at all by the market, which probably dwarfs our copper business at the moment. And so for next year, what are the key catalysts that are going to trigger the market to re-rate this stock? And outside of, crossing your fingers for copper to light the world up, and I think that the world needs to be watching closely what China will do next year and their response to the policy implementations of a new Trump administration, because I think that will be the key thing that will drive copper in a particular direction. And ultimately, projects like Hot Chile are massively leveraged to copper price. So always be watching copper price. Copper price moves, you want to move on the larger scale assets in that equity class. And Hot Chile is certainly one of only 5 companies that are capable of projects that scale at 100,000 tons per annum outside of the majors. So there is that thematic. But then what alpha to look out for? Well, firstly, Q1 is going to be huge for us. 2 major pre-feasibilities being delivered in Q1 in parallel. And on top of that, in the coming week or so, we're about to see first drill results out of a very large-scale porphyry that I've spent 6 years trying to get my hands on, which will be hopefully our next leg of major growth for our resource base. So, I think news from the drill bit coming on that front, further consolidation in and around Costa Fuego. There are a lot of things that we want to get our hands on that are high grade in nature and might come next. So drill bit news, acquisitions, and then the delivery of key milestones for the company in the first quarter. And that's really followed by mid-year submitting our environmental impact assessment. That's our final permit that we require to build this project. That will be a major milestone for the company, some 15 years in the making.
Well, Christian, thanks very much for hopping on here. It's always a pleasure to catch up. And I think you guys are definitely going to be one of those stories that our audience is going to want to keep an eye on. I always like to think that when you were thinking about how to make money in junior mining, first off, you've got to be able to pick some sort of commodity bull run that's going to happen. Secondly, you got to find big assets that have big scale. And then thirdly, you got to get the timing somewhat right. And I feel like all those things are lining up for you right now. So hopefully you'll keep coming back on here and updating our audience as you continue to roll out on your strategy. And I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, no, thanks, Steve. It was great to chat again and good to give you an update.
All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Guys, also let us know what you think in the comment section. Thanks, everyone.